Okay, I think hopefully people are connecting, and we are recording this, so if people get on just a little bit late and they miss this amazing intro that I'm giving right now, that's okay. They can watch it later, and as people join the live stream, it should start them wherever they want. They can go back and forward if they need to and rewatch a particular portion of it. So let's get started. We have a lot of presenters today. We're going to give some time to each person to talk about whether they attended a really great session that they want to share with everyone, or they might want to cover multiple sessions that they attended at the Build conference. It was supposed to be in Seattle, but it turned out it was just going to be remote, virtual conference, and people that were able to connect and watch several of the sessions and wanted to share what they experienced with all of you. They are presenting today, so I will introduce them in just a minute, and we'll get started with just a couple of slides here real quick just to get started. There was a lot going on. There was 48 hours straight of presentations. I attended quite a few of them. I am not going to present on all of these, but there's a lot of content there if you're interested. There are 648 sessions that were recorded, and there were different kinds of sessions, interviews and presentations and all kinds of stuff. You can go to mybuild.microsoft.com, and then also Channel 9 had a number of the sessions recorded and interviews and things that you can watch there as well. A lot of hot topics that were covered, a lot of sessions in each of these areas and some others. Azure was obviously a big thing, and Teams became a very popular product in the last few months. So they talked quite a bit about that. Microsoft Graph and Fluid Framework. If you're not familiar with what that is, you're welcome to watch some of the sessions. The Office 365 was renamed to Microsoft 365. A lot of tools, talked about tools there, and Microsoft's great at producing great tools for us. A lot of great stuff on AI if you're interested in that. Power Platform, another topic, Edge, and then there was a whole bunch of other stuff that doesn't fit into any of those categories. If you haven't seen the driverless vehicles thing, that was pretty cool. So a lot of great sessions, a lot of interesting stuff, whatever you might be interested in. Here's my presentation, so I'm going to stop sharing because that's going to come later. And we will start with Tony is going to roll a video, and then we'll move to Carly Nield, who is on the .NET Stack team. She'll present on some sessions she visited. Then it'll be David Ruckert, Rich Haddock, and then Josh Akatil, and then Tom Marvia, and I will be back at the very end. Hopefully I didn't mess it up too good. Let's see, Tony, roll the video.
Good morning and welcome to Build.
That seems a little strange. Let's tweak this. Maybe add a little reverb and some delay.
Good morning and welcome to Build.
That's better. Okay, so Microsoft's annual developer conference, known as Build, was a little bit different this year. Actually, it was a lot different. Under the shroud of a global pandemic, Microsoft had to pivot quickly, and in mid-March, they made some adjustments. For the past couple of years, Build was held at the Washington State Convention Center, 705 Pike Street, Seattle, Washington. This year, they had to move it to mybuild.microsoft.com. That's right, they moved it to 100% virtual. It's actually amazing that they were able to pivot so quickly and convert Build to a completely virtual event in just under 2 months. Build 2020 was a 48-plus hour, 24/7 online marathon with over 600-plus sessions. Most of those sessions were recorded and are posted online at mybuild.microsoft.com. Previous in-person Build conferences brought together approximately 6,000 to 7,000 developer attendees from around the globe to mingle and mangle in tight halls and loaded escalators. This year's conference eclipsed them all, with reportedly over 235,000 people registering and attending at least some portion of the Build conference. So, were you unable to watch 48 hours of Build conference? Did you miss an announcement? Did you forget to take notes, or probably can't read your own handwriting anyway? Don't worry. Besides having most of the sessions recorded and available online, Microsoft has provided a cheat sheet of all the announcements from the conference. This cheat sheet is known as Build 2020 Book of News and can be found at this URL. Here you will find a summary of all the cool announcements from Build from A to Y, Azure to Yammer. I wanted to provide a few insights regarding how to navigate the session catalog should you decide to watch any of the recorded sessions. Not all sessions were of equal value. In general, there were 6 session types: digital breakout, community, build live, pre-recorded sessions, key segment, and Imagine Cup garnered its own session type designation for some reason. Let's break these down. First, key segments are equivalent to keynote talks. There were 13 of those, and frankly, I'd throw Imagine Cup in that group. Imagine Cup is the results of the annual student developer competition, with the grand prize being $100,000. The key segments can be useful, but with the cheat sheet, unless you want to see any demos, you can probably skip most of them. Build Live. This section, most of these are skippable as well. They're more like news interviews with program managers about their products or announcements. While there can be nuggets of information in them, they are mostly talking heads and no demos, nor in-depth technical details. Community sessions are mostly Q&A with the engineers and the products they support and build. These can be interesting as the sessions were limited to about 250 or fewer people and required RSVP to get in. The moderators would field questions that people would type into the Q&A section, and people would upvote the best questions to be passed to the engineers. Some of these sessions were actually really good. The best sessions were the digital breakout sessions, like the traditional sessions you would attend in person at Build, and the pre-recorded sessions. I would focus most of my time on these. They are the most valuable.
We would have never, in the event space, accelerated and understood and moved on the road to mastery in digital events at the rate at which we are right now if things had just been going on normally.
Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the technology that made this all possible and that allowed Microsoft to digitize their entire event in just under 2 months. Most of the event was made possible by 2 major things. Number 1, Azure Media Streaming, and number 2, Microsoft Teams with some cool unreleased features. For the large digital breakout events, including keynotes and Build Live, Build 2020 leveraged Azure Media Streaming to reach hundreds of thousands of viewers simultaneously and scale up and down as needed. While I was watching for a glitch or a train wreck, it never really happened. AMS was able to keep up through the entire conference. It was impressive and really shows the power of the Azure platform.
Mark, where are you, Mark? Turn your camera on.
Microsoft Teams was heavily used for most of the pre-recorded and community sessions. However, it seemed like the version of Teams they used had more bells and whistles than the one we have. And sure enough, they did. They were able to have moderated team presentations where 3 or 4 people were moderators or presenters who could share their screen, video, and audio, while the 250 plus attendees in the session could subscribe to and see the presentation, but only interact by way of Q&A panel with the opportunity to ask questions or upvote other questions. This format actually worked pretty effectively as it screened out stupid questions, for the most part. The most exciting feature I found was the heavy use of NDI, or Network Device Interface, also known as IP video streams. I use NDI heavily with Open Broadcaster software, OBS. It is what allows me to use my iPhone as a remote video camera source across the network and allows me to tie together other machines across the network as sources. Additionally, it is built into Skype and is the reason most broadcasters prefer to use Skype for remote interviews. It allows them to subscribe to each of the individual video streams separately and control them and control how they appear on the screen without being subject to the software, Skype, Teams, Zoom, etc., deciding who should appear on the screen automatically. For the sake of the conference, Microsoft brought NDI into Teams, and it worked amazingly. They announced that this new feature would release sometime in June to the masses, so we should have it soon. NDI is a technology developed by a company called NewTek, makers of the video toaster, and was released a few years ago. There's an SDK available as well as a number of free tools. You can learn more by going to ndi.tv. I recommend that everyone who has iOS products quickly grab the NDI HX Camera and the NDI HX Capture app from the App Store before June 1st while they are still free. NDI is revolutionizing the IP video movement. So while I missed attending in person, Build 2020 still had lots to offer. Microsoft will learn from this event and improve their virtual events moving forward, I'm almost certain. It was an impressive feat though, and hats off to Microsoft.
All right, well, thanks everyone for watching. I'm going to hand it off to Carly here in just a second. Before I do, we forgot to set this up with a Q&A section, so if there are questions during the presentation, jump out to the Teams stack.net channel, and we'll be monitoring that. And if you have any questions and you ask them there, we'll try to get to them and answer them. So, all right, I'm going to send it over to Carly. Carly, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Carly Nield. I'm on the .NET Stack team. I work with Tony and Jim under Howard. So now that he's given you a bit of an introduction of what Build Conference was like this year, I wanted to talk about some of the sections that I found significant. So the first session that I want to talk about was titled Every Developer. Hopefully you can see my screen. In this session, Microsoft introduced some of their new technologies, including the Windows Package Manager, which hasn't been released yet, but they did a preview of it. Essentially, it includes a script to configure a new computer in a matter of minutes. They also introduced the Windows Terminal for Enterprise, which was released a little while ago. I actually downloaded it last week after seeing Rich's cool new terminal with a GIF background. Highly recommend downloading that if you haven't yet. And they did a demonstration with coding and collaboration in Teams. So there are some new Teams bots that you can download and install in your Teams app. And then if you call @code conversations in Teams, you can actually send and run code in the Teams application. So Microsoft is doing a lot with Teams now. It seems like this Build conference really emphasized their new progress with Teams. And they also introduced Code Spaces, which is essentially Visual Studio Code in the browser. On my team, there were some mixed feelings about this, but hopefully Code Spaces makes collaboration easier across teams. Another session that I thought was worth mentioning was the Blazor session. Blazor is a web UI framework for building single-page apps using .NET C# instead of JavaScript. So it's open source, cross-platform. It runs in any modern web browser on any platform. It's officially released, which means that you can do full-stack web dev with ASP.NET Core and run .NET natively in your browser. It's included in the .NET Core 3.1 SDK. In this session, Daniel Roth did a demo with a counter web app that would generally require JavaScript to run, but he did it using entirely C# and .NET. And he showed this in the dev tools in the browser, just in case anyone didn't believe he was actually using C#. He also did a demo with progressive Blazor web apps, which are able to cache the data in the browser from the web app. And it enables a user to install the web app on their machine so they can run it offline. He did a card checker demonstration with this one. It was just a little app that he downloaded using Blazor WebAssembly as well. And Blazor will be integrated into the .NET 5. Which will be released sometime in June. So this is a pretty cool new framework. I thought that session was worth checking out. And then the last session I want to talk about was titled The Future of Tech with Kevin Scott. In this session, Microsoft talked a lot about AI. If you have time, I highly recommend watching it. Essentially, they are building a lot of new technologies with machine learning and AI. Microsoft has developed a COVID-19 health bot that helps track and monitor COVID-19 using machine learning models. They have also developed an AI cloud-hosted supercomputer, and it's the 5th most powerful publicly recorded supercomputer in the world, built to train AI models. So there are a lot of new things that Microsoft is planning on doing with this supercomputer, and a lot of things that they'll hopefully discover we can do. And in this session, Sam Altman also did a demo with AI language models using IntelliCode. Essentially, a developer can define a function and comment what you want the function to do, and then the function uses AI to write itself. So when I wanted to do programming and computer science, I was largely attracted to this field because I didn't think that AI would render our jobs obsolete, but code can write itself now, so you never know. And then also, I want to show a short clip of the Edge AI Spot robot that Microsoft has developed. Hopefully this will play.
Thanks, Lila. I'm going to show how our Intelligent Edge solution can leverage AI to have a Boston Dynamics Spot robot look around, use our Edge AI to find the customer's car, and carry their takeout to them. We've mounted an Edge device on this Spot robot to allow us to control the robot autonomously and deploy our AI model using Onyx runtime. Here I'm showing the code where we use the Onyx AI model on the Edge device that will help us recognize the license plate using images captured from the robot's cameras. We will use this code to leverage the robot's camera perspective and control the robot's position to navigate to the car with our license plate. Lastly, we've built this using custom commands, leveraging speech and language understanding in Azure Cognitive Services to activate Spot to deliver the food. Putting everything together, we'll ask Spot to deliver the order. Hey, Spot! Deliver order to Lila. Note that in the future, Spot could potentially pick up and load the order into the car. Lila will tell us more about the complexity in training this kind of AI. Good job, Spot. Over to you, Lila.
So essentially, now that you've seen, like this Spot AI Edge robot uses AI to track a customer and their car and deliver their pizza to them. It uses cognitive services to locate a customer's vehicle and their license plate, and it uses speech AI to navigate to that specific customer that is specified. So there are a lot of cool things about machine learning. Kevin Scott called the intersection between AI and science the new calculus, which I thought was significant because most of us learn calculus at some point in our education. It's pretty standard, and so the fact that AI is the new calculus, according to Kevin Scott. We did talk about how for all of this to have a positive impact, it must be available to everyone. So we should democratize access to these platforms, and we must take care to develop AI thoughtfully, responsibly, and so I know at the church that's something that resonates with a lot of us. Used widely and used ethically. And so I highly recommend watching that session. It was really cool to watch Build Conference this year. Time over to David Rooker. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Thanks.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm David Rooker. Great. I'm getting a signal that my mic's muted, but I'm not muted, I don't think. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. I am on the ALM.NET Stack team, or whatever the new name of that team is called, and I've been supporting Team Foundation Server and Azure DevOps for almost 9 years now here on this team. And Jim asked me to give some reviews of some of the presentations that were about Azure DevOps. And there really weren't any. So it's been about a year. And so Microsoft, does away with all of its platform about once a year. So most of the presentations are about GitHub and GitHub Actions. And there were a few presentations on that I'll be going over. So the one of the big presentations on this was by, oh, not this one, sorry, this first page, was by Martin Woodward and Shanku Nyoji from GitHub. Martin Woodward, if you have ever had a Team Foundation Server book, he is co-authors of most of them, and he's been on the Team Foundation Server Azure DevOps team for years and years. He's been one of the guys who've been around since almost the beginning, I think. This presentation went over some interesting insights. What Microsoft has done is, after they purchased GitHub, they basically merged their Azure DevOps engineering teams and their GitHub engineering teams together into one engineering unit. And they are going over, people asked them if Azure DevOps is going away and GitHub, they should be moving over to GitHub, and they kind of smiled and said, yeah, no, we'll be supporting both of them for a while. So we'll see what the future has to hold here. But GitHub Actions is basically Azure DevOps pipelines. It's built on Azure DevOps pipelines technology with a unique GitHub experience or feel added into it. And this presentation went over a number of cool demos of using using GitHub Actions in multiple ways. They also went over how many shipped items they have released. They've shipped over 200 items already this year, and much more to come. And the demos that this presentation had were this last line here. One that's really cool is the GitHub Advanced Security. They have a number of security tools. Hopefully that we can get this. I don't know if we can or not. I'm not sure how much it costs, but it will do secret scanning in your code. It will do a number of dependency. It'll look for dependency updates for what your dependencies are in your code, and it will do code scanning and look for vulnerabilities in there as well. It's pretty cool. It actually does automated pull requests when it finds something, and it tries to be as helpful as it possibly can. So yeah, I recommend taking a look at this if you're interested in GitHub Actions and learning about where Azure DevOps and GitHub, what they're planning on. A lot of it's probably still new, and they haven't had a lot of presentations on this in this year's Build conference, but one of them was this next presentation by Gopint. That's all he said his name was. I'm not sure what CH stands for. This is the link to it. He goes over a number of different demos using GitHub Actions, and he's basically using this GitHub code that he was demoing, and so I thought I would link it here. You can go and look at it and not have to read or watch the presentation. It's about a half an hour though. It's pretty interesting if you want to go learn about this. He also mentioned there are a number of Azure Action Workflow samples that you can go and take a look at in this GitHub repository. You can jump in here, and they have probably over 100 of different samples that you can go look at for different things you might want to do. And also GitHub.com Azure Actions has more examples of things you can do with GitHub and with Azure. So that's it for my presentations on GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps. Like I said, there weren't a lot of them. There were some examples sprinkled through a number of different demos and presentations. But if you take a look at these, you might get a pretty good understanding of how to use GitHub Actions. And GitHub, they basically made it free for most everyone, and they're charging for enterprise services, obviously, but you can go and jump in and start using it yourself and create as many repositories as you want and invite as many people as you want to your GitHub account now, which is kind of cool. And that is all I have, and I'll turn time over to Rich.
Thanks, David. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing if you will stop. I'm happy to be able to talk a little bit about what I got out of Build this year. I'm going to share my screen, and maybe There we go. I think Tony did a great job of giving us a flavor for what build was like this year. It was quite a bit different than all of the other years. If you go to the mybuild.microsoft.com, it lists 578 sessions. So it makes it really hard to give an adequate summary of what build was like. And it also makes it really hard to pick just one build session that you know to cover. There's so much good stuff. Jim says that I can't cover all 578 of them in this meeting though, so I'm gonna pick just one. And my favorite session was movement, cultivating ease with yoga. So what we're gonna do now is everybody should probably go get their yoga mat. Here's my yoga mat. And we are going to reenact this session together. I'm going to give you some time to go get your mats. Just kidding. My real favorite session was, and I don't know if it's really my favorite, but it's one that I can demo some of the goodness that came from it, and they're all my favorite session, even the yoga one. They're all great. But I want to talk a little bit about Visual Studio 2019 Remote Dev Tips and Tricks. This was delivered by Mads Christensen. If you're familiar with Mads, he does a lot of Visual Studio extension development. And so he has a lot of good tips and tricks about things that you can do with Visual Studio. And the angle that he takes in this delivery, in this session, is the things that you can do with Visual Studio 2019 that make it easier for you to adjust your work style, because you're probably working in a different place than you used to work in. And that's pretty much all of my slides. I have these resources that I will share with you probably in that in the .NET Stack team channel after we're done here. But that's it for me in slides. So let's move on to, I'm just going to overview some of the things that Mads demoed in his talk. So right now you see I have Visual Studio 2019 up and running. This is kind of the out of the box window layout for Visual Studio 2019. I'm not sure how new this is, but I can do things like switch to a different window layout with a keystroke. Maybe you're doing a little bit more web development and you need a test explorer and you want a web publish activity on the bottom and a task runner explorer and some of that kind of stuff. And I can get to that with just one keystroke. And then sometimes you might be on a smaller monitor and you just want to see as much code as possible. So there's a keystroke you can push that'll just give you that. And so that I have more real estate available to me so I can just look at code. This is probably a good example because there's well, let me find one of the services. Yeah, there's one. So, you know, I don't have to scroll as much, but, you know, they're still scrolling. So I want to talk about how you do that. You know, sometimes I get running around in Visual Studio and I start messing with some of my windows and how they're set up. And if I don't push the right button, and I might look at it, I might turn on a view of something, and what's a good one? Probably that one. And maybe I want to pop it out and play around with this Klingon interface for how to dock or not dock things and get it wrong. And it's like, well, I don't really want servers over there. How did all that happen? And then you start messing around with it, and pretty soon everything's all messed up. You can use those same keystrokes to go back to your known good state of how you want things to be, and be right back in the saddle again and back to developing. Let's do one of these on our own. So here's my kind of see more code, wide monitor window layout, but maybe I just want to, I've got some time to just micro focus on what I'm doing, and I want to just hack on my basket service, and I don't even want to see this anymore. I can just click it off. So let's do that. Let's get rid of Solution Explorer and then Team Explorer. And let's also get rid of Live Share. And so now I have the whole window just for my code. And then the way to hook that up to a hotkey is you go to this window menu and you choose Save Window Layout. And I'm going to call this just the code. And now you'll notice down here it said window layout, just the code successfully applied. And the hotkeys are easily remembered. It's just Control Alt and a number. But if you want to remember which ones they are, you can go back to this window menu and apply window layout, and you can see all these. So this is the out of the box one. This is the web dev one. My minimalist, my wide monitor, and my just the code. These two are actually the same, and just the code. So I can switch between those with just Control Alt and the keystroke. So I can go back to my web dev one, for example, or all the way back to. So that's one of the cool demos I thought. It was nice because I do struggle a lot with messing up my windows in Visual Studio, and it's nice to have these ways to kind of ground you and get you back to what you were looking at before. Another I talked about was, and this might be a sore subject for a lot of people, but sometimes it takes Visual Studio a little bit of time to load. And so some of the things that we can do to help that be less intrusive are, well, first it helps to understand what's going on when I load a bunch of stuff in Visual Studio. And to help you visualize that, I'm going to go back to, I think, this view. So there's a lot going on here. I have a bunch of tools windows open. I have a bunch of tabs across the top with all of these source code files open, and I have a whole bunch of hierarchy expanded in my Solution Explorer. All of those things are making Visual Studio do work, and there's ways that we can cut down on that work. And you know, at the end of the day, it might be normal for us to end up with a Visual Studio looking like this, and that's perfectly fine. But maybe at the beginning of the day, you want a nice, clean, tidy look so you can start and be micro-focused on the work that you're trying to do. And so there are a couple of tips that that Mads gave us for how to do that. The first one is there's a couple of settings in Tools and Options, and I'll show you here. If you go to Tools, Options, Projects and Solutions, and then you can uncheck Reopen Documents on Solution Load, and restore Solution Explorer project hierarchy state on solution load. This makes it so that when you open a solution, none of this state has to be stored, and therefore none of it has to be rehydrated when you reopen that solution. So let's hit OK on that, and I'm going to close this solution, and then I'm going to reopen it. And Visual Studio will happily prompt me eventually, because I have a slow laptop. I'm due for a refresh, but so I'm going to reopen that solution, and you notice it's still doing some stuff with the tooling, but it didn't have to do as much work in terms of expanding this hierarchy or rendering any of the tabs or loading the Roslyn workspace to provide colorization for all the files that were open. So for me and for my laptop, even though I'm suffering under the circle of patience right now, this is actually pretty fast. Another tip that I can show you when this starts responding is that if you're like me, you'll have a lot of tools windows open at the end of the day too. And that also makes Visual Studio do plenty of extra work when you start. So I probably don't need Test Explorer up right at the beginning. Maybe after I write some stuff, I might want to have the Test Explorer available and the output and all that kind of stuff, but I probably don't need it up at ground zero. And there is an extension called Reset Tool Windows. I have that installed here. And I have that in the links that you can get at the end of this presentation that I'll paste in. So let me show you what I have installed. It's this one, Reset Tool Windows. So once you have that installed, you can go back into Tools, Options, and Environment. And then underneath Startup, you'll have a new subcategory called Reset Tool Windows. And the defaults are what I have right here. So all of these things are set to false for the most part, except for Solution Explorer, which opens really fast anyway. So to demonstrate this, all we have to do is exit out of Visual Studio and then restart it. Maybe it didn't get the memo that I wanted it to restart. All right, so we're restarting Visual Studio now. One interesting thing is that Teams really chews up a lot of your CPU when you're presenting. But as Visual Studio loads, we'll eventually see that it should load up without all the tools windows open. Here it comes. And we'll just open that same project. And it looks like it's going to load minimized with all the tools windows minimized. This is just a small sample of the demonstrations that Mads did for ways that you can cope with working from home and other changes to your work style that have come about in the last few months. He also does a great demo of CodeSpace that I would highly recommend, and there's a few nuggets. His presentation is divided into his actual slides and his demos, and then a QA section. Don't turn it off. Go watch this video. Don't turn it off though at the QA section. Watch that because he gives you a couple of other pretty good nuggets at the end. Yeah, I think I mentioned that I'm due for a laptop refresh. So just imagine this coming up and not having any tool windows open. You can go demonstrate it for yourself and see that it works pretty well. And with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and hand it over to Josh. Thanks, Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Rich. So as I went into this build conference, I went to look into a topic of personal interest that I had. I looked for something that had that seemed to have a big impact on how we can do some web development. Some of the topics that I looked into were Blazor and Code Online, which seemed to be really cool topics. Those are something that Carly kind of went over. I looked into some serverless discussions, which that's going to be my topic today. And also as a side note, I also looked into something called quantum computing, which I didn't have much idea about, but I was like, maybe this has something to do with web development. Turns out though that it doesn't. It's something that's actually way out there. It has to do with, they gave an example of trying to figure out a super complex traffic system, and that's something that's kind of really complex and almost inconceivable, but you use quantum computing to go figure that out. I was able to post a question in there at the end of the discussion asking whether or not this quantum computing would replace coding or programming as we know it now, and they said, heck no, this is something that you won't be having to program a web API with quantum computing anytime soon. So that was something that I was kind of relieved because Q# seemed a little bit complex. And anyways, so I'm going to be moving on to my presentation. I decided to go with serverless computing. So here we are, serverless with Azure Functions. Wasn't able to see much of a too much discussion on this topic, but this is something that is quite recent. Especially there's something called function as a service, which goes hand in hand with serverless, and I actually got those two mixed up. A lot of people I hear get serverless and function as a service mixed up. But to go in a little bit of background of what serverless is, here's a link to one of the things that I saw. This was just a discussion that they had with some devs. They were these startup devs, and they asked about their experiences that they had with serverless. But the official definition of serverless on the Microsoft website is it still requires a server. Just because it has serverless in the name doesn't mean that there's no server. It's just essentially you don't need to manage that server. One of the perks you get from it is an automatic scaling and provisioning of resources. But as I said, the management and provisioning of the server are practically invisible to the developer. They don't need to take care of it. That's not something that really applies in a lot of our teams here, since we have aces that help us out. But this is something that's I've also looked into as like a side project, something very interesting to me, and it's very helpful. When they asked these devs about their experiences that they've had with serverless, they said such things as you pay for what you use. It's kind of using a what's the word, starts with a C. It's a model where you just pay for, it's scalable. It's a consumption model. Thank you. I should have listed that down. It's a consumption model. They said such things also as less baggage, more focus on logic. They really liked the fact they didn't have to maintain the servers. It was more scalable for them. Practically, it allowed them to focus more on the business logic rather than all sorts of other overhead maintenance and costs that they'd have to use up with trying to handle a server. So in the end, the productivity of using a serverless infrastructure allowed for them to get faster time to market, have more of an agile approach, and didn't have to spend so much time on all that overhead stuff, and more efficient use of all their resources. Now, to go a little bit deeper, going back to the function as a service model, with the combination of function as a service and serverless, you can do things like serverless computation, this is the topic within the topic that I found to be super interesting. But functions as a service, if you guys don't know, it's a piece of code that is deployed to the cloud and runs inside a hosting environment that completely abstracts the servers that run the code. This is something that, in a way, most of us are used to a back end as a service, and function as a service can essentially, you can kind of opt the two out for each other. Function as a service can work the same way, but it works completely different. So the function as a service works with functions and events. Combining the two, you get an event-driven workflow, you get pay per execution, zero administration, auto scaling, and short-lived stateless functions. I'm going to be showing a demo here with an Azure function based on a serverless environment. There are multiple types of Azure functions. You guys can just pause the video at any time just to look at these. There's multiple resources that talk about it, but the one I'm going to be demoing today is an HTTP event-driven Azure function. And here are some links that you guys can look at. But to move on to my demo, so here we are in my code. I have, so a big thing as to why I decided to go for this is I really like the consumption-based model. So rather than having a web app being hosted 24 hours a day and you're paying for that hosting the entire time, say, as an example, $100 a month for this hosting. If you're to do a consumption model, you only get for a pay for what you use type of thing. And so if no one visits your website for the original web app, then you're still paying $100 a month. Whereas if no one visits your website using the consumption model, then it's $0 for that month. So that's something that I felt was really interesting. And so to go along with that topic, I used a table rather than, this is also based on a consumption model, but I could have used Azure DB, I could have used their MongoDB or the Cosmos DB that they talk about. I decided to just go with the table operation because it is a little bit different. Surprisingly, there's no overhead, not as much overhead or boilerplate as you would have normally with a normal .NET Core application. You have a startup class and a program class, but in this you don't really have that. You just have a proj file, a settings file, which just has some connection strings, and but right here you have, it's essentially just this. This right here is my HTTP hook function. So what happens is it has a request, it links to a table that I pretty much link to my connection string, and then it's able to, so for this example, it's just a GET request, and it's able to send me back to my employee data that I'm wanting. So I'm hosting it right now. Actually, I just pressed F5 to run it, so it's hosting and listening. I have my Postman listening to that API point. I'm going to go ahead and click send, and it returns back an OK object with, I only have one employee in there, which is myself right now, but it's able to return back this. So this is very interesting because it essentially emulates the way we interact with the back end, which would also be termed backend as a service, but it is using a function as a service. So it's not something that's actively listening all the time. It's using an event-driven process to where it listens on that event and it's able to send back data. And so it's able to follow along with this consumption model that Serverless is able to offer, as well as Azure Functions. You're able to utilize that consumption model based that way. So in the end, you can save a lot of money and you have that potential. If not, if there's a lot of people that access your is trying to access your API or your data, then it scales, and so it ends up being, you either spend as much maybe as the normal model or less, but I don't in any way see you spending more. Anyways, that is something that I found to be super interesting, and figured that would greatly change possibly the way people decide to do it that way, that they could decide to change the way they do things, and it's a different way of programming. So I thought it was interesting. That is my presentation. So I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Tom.
Thank you, Josh. That's you actually did a demo. That's very impressive. Good job. So I'm going to share my slides. So I'm Tom Maravilla. I am not on the Stack team. I work in the technology manager team, and we do a lot of .NET code there. And I was very disappointed this year and almost didn't go to Build because of them canceling the event. But I humbled myself and decided I would try it out. And they even sent me a loot box, which I wasn't very impressed with. It was okay. But one of the sessions that stuck out to me was they were talking about Microsoft certifications as I was going through and building my schedule for the day. And I've had kind of a love-hate relationship with Microsoft certifications. I started developing back in the late 90s, and it seemed like in the early 2000s, there were all kinds of certifications, and a lot of people would choose to go down the certification path instead of going down the college path. So I went down the college path and got my degree, and I kind of looked at Microsoft certifications as garbage. So anyways, my views have changed over the last 10 years or so, and Microsoft has come just light years ahead in their training and their certifications. And so Alex Payne gave a presentation on the new MS Learn site and the certifications. And so I just wanted to take a few minutes and go over that and help all of you who may have imposter syndrome like I do and feel like I'm always out of date, and that anytime someone asks me a question, I'll probably never have read that. So I'm constantly paranoid that I'm always out of date. So this MS Learn site really, when I go there and play there, it helps me overcome that a bit. So what Microsoft did was they analyzed the industry, and they looked for, using their products, they looked for the trends in what companies want, all the different skills sets that Microsoft provides, and they kind of consolidated them into different learning paths and roles. And so once they did that, they put 4 areas together where you can spend time learning. They have self-paced learning, training events, instructor-led training, which is similar to what we've well, the training events are like Build, instructor-led training. You can pay. Some of them are free, some of them you can pay for. But like my beginnings slide showed, that they have over 1,000 modules and learning paths, or I should say modules, in MS Learn. So this is what the site looks like, and they've come a long way. It's very intuitive. It's easy to go and find a learning path that you want to study. And here again are some of the areas you can look at for self-paced learning. And most of the learning and paths out here are free. And some are paid, like the training events, some you have to pay to go to. But if you're like me and do a lot of your own learning online, then this site is for you. And let's see, certifications. Again, there are many. Here's kind of a sample of the different certifications, especially for us developers. Some of the questions that I had going into this and that were answered in the Q&A in the session were, why are the certifications so limited? You know, or are there certifications for every technology that Microsoft has? And the answer is no. And again, Microsoft researched companies and tried to find out what companies want when they're looking for employees, especially developers, and they provide certifications in those areas. Some more of the Q&A that I found useful. What is the difference between fundamentals, the fundamental classes, role-based, and specialties? And they kind of build on themselves. So the fundamentals, you can go, again, these are all free. You go and you can take fundamental classes. Then if you say, okay, I really like these fundamentals and I want to be, I want this kind of a job like a data scientist or something like that, you can go down that role-based path after you've done the fundamental on that. Role-based have a little bit more requirements. They require certain fundamentals classes that you take. And then if you really want to drill down into a specialty, you can go down those paths. Once you've got that under your belt, you can go take the certification. And the certifications are no joke. I mean, you might think they're easy to get, but you really have to understand and learn. So take your time during these classes and take notes and prepare yourselves, because the first one I took, I failed. And it was I thought it would be a little easier, but they're no joke. And the value of these certifications, employers really look when they're hiring, especially for Azure developers or data scientists, Azure data science stuff. They'll look for these certs, and it will put you above all the other applicants if you have some of these certifications. Another question that was answered was, how long do these certs last? And Microsoft is still working on this, but they usually run about 2 years. And so if you, to me, that's a little bit of a turnoff, but I understand with how fast technology moves that you have to be current. Otherwise, you're out of date. You're a COBOL programmer instead of a .NET programmer. So if anyone even knows what that means anymore. But yeah, if you get a minute, get out there and on MS Learn and play around. Look at some of the classes they provide, and it's very, very beneficial. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Appreciate everyone's participation today and the presentations that were given. I'm going to share just one slide and then we'll be done. So hang in there, we're almost coming to the end. My favorite session that was presented at Build this year was on the MS Teams, and it was presented by the developers and the program managers that work on the MS Teams project. And so I thought it was very interesting to get their insights into what they felt was the most important tips about using Teams. And over the last several months, we've been using Teams a lot. And probably some of you are very, very familiar with some of these things, but you may not be aware of all of them. So I thought I'd share some of the tips that they shared. They actually called it 10 top tips, but they had a little extra time to talk about a few more. The first one was when you're presenting. When you're presenting and you're sharing slides, you don't always get to see what's going on, what people's reaction is to your presentation. And so you can switch between them by clicking on the people's faces down below and get a view of what they're seeing, of what their face looks like while they're viewing your slides and your presentation. So that was pretty handy. Another one is that you can join the same meeting twice, and I've actually done that here where I'm connected to Teams in the live stream and I'm presenting, but I have another monitor or another computer nearby that can see the different view about what everyone else is seeing while they're seeing this presentation. So you can always connect once in Teams and then once in a browser. Also, in your presenter view, you can share different things. So you can share your whole desktop so people can see the whole screen that you're seeing, or you can share just an app or a different monitor than you're currently using. So there's a lot of different options there. The fourth one is you can pin people. So you grab their image below, or you can right click on it and say pin, and then you may not want to see, especially in a meeting where that's 30 or 40 people, you may want to just look at your manager or a couple people, the presenter and the person he's kind of addressing in his presentation. So you can pin a couple of the people's faces up to your screen, so that's kind of handy. If you're on a low bandwidth or have bad connection, you can turn off the video altogether and stop the incoming video and just get the audio on your desktop or your laptop as you're connecting. Also, if you really are not having good experience on your machine, you can go into the meeting details and you can enter a phone number in and click on a button that says call me, and you can get off of your desktop, your laptop, if it's not for giving you what you want, the experience you were hoping for, you can just connect through your phone, and then you'll just get the audio, obviously, but it'll be a lot better connection. And you could still keep the video going on your laptop if that's good, and then get the audio from your phone in the same meeting. Also, they showed a companion mode where you can connect with your phone as well, and then because sometimes you want to show people what you're seeing in your office or in your desk, or you want to have them look out your window or whatever. And so instead of grabbing your laptop or your camera and moving it around, you could actually switch over to your phone and use the camera on your phone. And that's kind of a handy thing to know about. There's also what they call enable captions. I think that was a preview feature, but I think now if you have the latest version of Teams, it's not preview anymore. It's a full-fledged feature, and it'll actually take, using AI, it will take the audio that's coming into the meeting and convert it to text, and you can read along to see what people are saying, and that's kind of handy. It's actually fairly entertaining when it gets it wrong and puts up something funny. Also, there's another feature which I'm not sure, I haven't got working yet, but I don't know if it's something that ICS had, the church has to turn on that feature for us to be able to share the whiteboard feature. I'll have to keep looking at that and see how to get it going. But it's kind of handy where you can bring up a whiteboard and people can draw on it from wherever they are remotely, and you can share it, and then it will save that whiteboard, what people wrote, in the meeting notes, and so you're able to go back to it and refer to it later or add things to it as you go forward. So that's kind of a handy thing. I use OneNote, and you can share in there as well. Number 10 is background effects. I think that's pretty interesting that people, you saw, I think Josh today was presenting with one of the backgrounds that are provided by Microsoft, and that's kind of fun to have a background. You don't always want to see the room that's behind you. That's kind of boring. But you can actually download any image you want as your background, and if you have a picture of something you want to put in your background, you just save that image file to C:/users/your name, app data, roaming, Microsoft, Teams, backgrounds, uploads. Very easy to remember. I'll copy and paste that into the chat so you can see that later if you want to refer to it. So that's kind of a handy little thing. You can just change any background to any image you want. The number 11 is recording. We are recording this presentation, and so it can be available for anybody. You can stop it and rewind it, and you can watch it later. So it's handy to have meetings that a lot of stuff is going on. You can record it and then refer back to it later. Number 12 is you can put notes over your picture. That's if you ever notice when you're talking, it has your picture in the lower corner, and you can just put something over the top of that so you don't have to look at your own ugly face. I do that a lot. And then the last one is you can switch from your computer to your phone and back again. Very easy. You just bring up your phone, bring up the Teams app on your phone. It will recognize that you're currently in a meeting. You click on join, and it will switch over to your phone. You'll be connected to the meeting from your phone instead of your laptop, and you can switch back and forth. This is kind of handy if you're in a long meeting that's kind of boring, you start getting hungry, or you have to go to the bathroom, and you can't pick up if you have a laptop, maybe you can take it with you. But if you have a desktop that you're on, you want to switch over to your phone, take that with you into the kitchen, get something to eat, and then come back to your desk and sit down on the desktop. Anyway, some handy little things that Microsoft Teams has available for you. And if these features aren't available in the version you have, you might have to be a little patient until the next version comes out. But I hope you've enjoyed our review of the .NET Engineering Forum conference report for Build 2020. Appreciate everybody connecting to us and watching this session. And if you want to watch any of the other .NET Engineering forums that have been recorded, you can go out to the Integration Point website under the .NET Stack team, and we have a lot of the recordings put there. This will be available, the recording for this will be available in Microsoft Teams, so you can go view that at any time you want. And we may try and put a link to it on Integration Point, or maybe edit it a little bit so I look a little more handsome or something. Anyway, thanks everybody for attending today. I appreciate all the presenters and for the time and effort they put into their presentations. Thanks, that's it.